Hello, hi everyone. Hi Grace, welcome. Really excited about today's event. And Grace is going to speak today on best practices when it comes to recruiting out of college. She has a lot of experience in this field, working for a range of different companies and sort of debunking common misbeliefs on sort of how to make yourself the best candidate, how to reach out to recruiters, things that you might read online but might not be true. And so I spoke with Grace earlier on this topic, and definitely different than anything we've sort of had surrounding this. So really looking forward to this presentation and the Q&A after. And with that said, I will hand it over to Grace for a introduction and to get the presentation started. Grace, welcome, and thank you so much for doing this Xoogler School presentation.
Thank you so much, James. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen. All right, let's see if this is working. Okay, great. Oops. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. One sec. Okay. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining me today. My name is Grace Wu, and I'm a recruiter. So as James mentioned, the topic I'm covering today is on how to get a recruiter's attention. So I know there's a lot of information out there, and I would love to take this time today to debunk some common misconceptions about the recruiting process. And my goal today is to help you navigate all of this so that you can make the best decisions and then land your dream job. Today, I'm going to go over several broad topics spanning all stages in a typical job search. Each of these areas are big topics, and they can easily be a presentation on their own. So the format I'll follow is by sharing some of the most common misconceptions in each stage and go over what really happens and the best practices that will help you stand out. Lastly, I'll recap what we covered so that you can leave this session equipped with 3 key takeaways for your next job search. So to start off, I would like to give you some context about my background. For the past decade, my experience in both human resources and in recruiting has spanned multiple industries from biotech to pharma to tech to financial services. And I worked at small to large companies based in locations ranging from San Diego to the San Francisco Bay Area. And in my own experience, I have personally used many different methods to land jobs, ranging from networking to employee referral to using my LinkedIn profile and, of course, to apply as a general applicant. And these are all viable pathways. I'll get into more detail about how you can also use all these different methods to find your dream role. So the first topic we're going to discuss is networking. A common belief out there is that networking is only for extroverts, special events or job fairs, or people with little to no experience. So is this fact or fiction? The answer is none of this is true. Networking is for everyone, and it only becomes more important the farther you go in your career, because it's still the most effective way to stand out. In fact, 85% of all jobs are filled via networking. And this is according to a LinkedIn survey conducted a few years ago with over 3,000 respondents of all career levels. This means that before the jobs are posted online, they're either filled internally or through a referral from a trusted source. Okay, so now you know that being highly networked is essential, but you might be asking yourself, how do you get started? How do you get noticed if, let's say, recruiters don't even go to your school, or let's say they recruit at your school, but they're not recruiting people of your background? What if, because of the pandemic, a lot of events have been canceled? How do you get in front of someone? These are all great questions, but before I get to the solution, I want to clarify quickly what I mean by recruiting and by networking. I don't mean go out there in the world or online and meet as many people as possible. Networking is about meeting a few well-connected people who can vouch for your ability and who are willing to refer you to other well-connected people. One good contact who can vouch for your ability is better than 10 people who vaguely know your name. To get started, let's consider what is around you. So this can be your professor, your TA, your classmates, your coworkers, and even family and friends. Make a list of people who managed you or you have worked with in some capacity, whether from a school project, part-time job, or even former internships. Next, craft your personal statement, and I'll go over this in a moment. Also, have a specific ask. I can't stress enough the importance of being specific, especially for cold outreaches. You'll get a much better response rate when you ask a specific question. Last but not least, always follow up and do it quickly. Follow up right after you meet someone and recap what you discussed and also state your next steps. So there are several ways to network and get connected to a recruiter or a hiring manager. And these are through, as I mentioned earlier, family and friends. Also through your social network, joining a volunteer group, or even being part of an industry membership or professional organization. So I want to go over how and some examples of what you can do to stand out. While networking with family and friends, instead of asking a general question such as, do you have any opportunities? Have a specific ask. Do some research on whether or not you prefer a particular industry, location, even target companies, and even a quick search of the career sites for your target company will show you what jobs they have available, and then you can formulate a very specific question from there. That will get your response rate up a lot and also let people know how they can help you. While you're networking on social media, instead of just having a social media presence, a better way is, why not, share your progress via your favorite platform. This is actually a really good way to get noticed by potential recruiters and hiring managers who may be searching for people like you. You can also follow industry professionals through keyword or hashtag searches on various social network platforms and then be connected that way. Finally, you can always join industry or professional groups on all of these different social networks and meet all these experts and other professionals who can connect you to your next opportunity. Networking through volunteering is another great idea to meet people. And I'm sure a lot of you have already thought about joining or have already joined a volunteer group. An even better way is to take on a leadership role as a board member, or if you organize events, it's another great way to show off your skills and then have people there who can vouch for your ability. And then of course, you can increase your qualifications by taking on opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise. Finally, with professional associations, instead of just having a membership and participating in events, consider starting your own group and build your network that way. Especially when you're starting out and you're having a hard time breaking into your field of interest, it's this type of outside of box thinking that is actually very attention grabbing and demonstrates your passion for what you do. So going back earlier to what I said about having a networking plan, a key component of networking is your ability to tell your story. And this is oftentimes also called the elevator pitch. It's really important that you fine-tune your story, but also strike the right tone. So maybe don't be like Michael Scott here. So how do you tell a compelling story? Well, first of all, there's nothing more universal than having a personal pitch or personal story, because no matter what industry and how far along you get in your career, you will always need to be able to sell yourself, your ideas, and even your business. So how do you do it? To craft a compelling personal story, first, make sure to keep it to a minimum of 30 seconds to 1 minute max. Start with a clear and concise introduction. Use your full name and also share a little bit about what describes you, what you do. Think of yourself like a brand. Determine the one thing that you offer that no one else can and incorporate that into your pitch. Have a good idea of what you're looking for and where you want to go. Not everyone will be interested in the same details, so research the person, the interviewer, or even the business that you'll be speaking to and adjust your pitch accordingly. Devise a sentence or two that clearly communicates your top 3 skills. Finally, close again with your name and provide some way to follow up. And make sure to practice your pitch several times. This will help you feel both confident and convincing. Okay, So now that you've networked and found the perfect opportunity, it's time to apply and submit an application. I want to tell you a little bit about what happens behind the scenes. When you submit an application on a job site or a company career page, this is what happens. Your resume and application responses get sent to what's called the Applicant Tracking System, ATS for short. So what is it? ATS is a software that acts as a database, and almost all Fortune 500 companies use one of these ATSs for recruiting. There's many more. This is just a snapshot. Recruiters like myself use an ATS to communicate with candidates. We use it to schedule interviews, and we use it to store your resume and interview records. It keeps us both legally compliant and organized. So the reason I mention this is because at the application stage, one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that the system, or the ATS, is a robot that automatically reviews and rejects resumes. So is this fact or fiction? This is simply not true. In fact, real people, such as recruiters, are reviewing your resume and reading every word. However, even though the ATS isn't per se rejecting you, there are some factors that can hurt your application. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to optimize your resume so that when it's parsed by the ATS, your information is showing up properly. So first of all, make sure that your resume is in a standard format, meaning that you're not using some sort of fancy template, and make sure that it's a standard font, meaning it's one of those more legible fonts, not a cursive or wingdings or something that's really difficult to parse by a typical ATS. Next, recruiters do use keyword searches to look through the database, especially if there are hundreds of thousands of candidates. So with keyword searches, it's especially important to make sure that your top skills and qualifications are listed and easily identifiable. Because if it's not on your resume, then how would the recruiter know that you know? Okay, so sometimes you might notice that your application is still getting rejected suspiciously quickly. So why is this happening? So besides submitting your resume, you might have noticed that there are additional questions on the application itself. And these are mandatory questions that you have to answer. These questions are called knockout questions or screening questions, and they often address must-haves or core requirements in order for you to be considered for the job and move forward in the interview process. For instance, knockout questions can deal with basic qualifications. Do you have a certain degree, license, or certification? It can also deal with job functions. Do you have work experience in a particular area? It can also ask you questions about logistics. Are you willing to travel internationally 50% of the time? Are you willing to work the night shift? And finally, it can deal with legal questions. Do you have authorization to work in the United States? If you answer any of these screening questions a certain way, it might be why your application is getting automatically rejected by the ATS. So you might be wondering, is there a way for me to get past these screening questions? The best approach, unfortunately, is still to answer honestly. Don't lie. Because even if you got past the screening questions and made it through to the interview, you may still be disqualified. Then your time and efforts will be wasted. I want to share really quickly a real life example. A Walmart executive was fired for lying about having a bachelor's degree. He never graduated. And the worst part is, he was actually caught by a new background check that was more rigorous than the one when he started, when Walmart tried to promote him. He said, I suppose the irony here is that I was about to be promoted, and now a couple weeks later, I'm going to be leaving the company. So the moral is don't lie, because it will definitely catch up to you. But let's say this is your dream company and you're determined to apply. My recommendation is that you still answer truthfully and then reach out to the recruiter or the hiring manager and explain why they should move you forward. This way they can hear you out and in the best case scenario, make an exception for you. If the knockout question is subjective and you can truthfully answer either way, do some research. You can review the job description, check out employee profiles on LinkedIn, and tailor your responses. Sometimes, however, despite your best efforts, you may still find yourself in a rut. If things still aren't working, maybe it's time to change your approach. Consider maybe if you need to amend your target companies or job level. Do you need to build up your qualifications? Freelance work, side hustles, online certificates, or volunteer work are all ways to get you closer to your goal. Okay, so now that you've networked to find an opportunity and you've applied, we're now at the interview stage. Another common misconception is that recruiters are the initial gatekeeper with no real control of the hiring process. Is this fact or fiction? You guessed it, it's fiction. In fact, your recruiter is your biggest champion throughout the entire interview process. At a very high level, recruiters review resumes and applications and create a short list of qualified candidates for the hiring manager to review. So even though recruiters may not make the final hiring decision, they are influential to your success throughout the entire process. So I want to tell you a little bit more about how to work with recruiters. So first, there are a lot of different types of recruiters, and knowing the difference will help empower you during your job search. At a really, really high level, again, we have external recruiters, also known as agency or search firm recruiters, and they work across multiple companies to help them fill their jobs. They also often hire for short-term temporary roles. Because they're not tied to just one company, you can be considered for a wide range of roles and opportunities across lots of different companies just by getting to know one agency recruiter. Another type of recruiter you may often encounter is the internal or in-house corporate recruiters. They are the employee of one company, so they only hire for jobs at their company, and they're usually part of their own HR department for the company. They will likely know the company culture and the inner workings extremely well. So both internal and external recruiters are capable of helping you land your dream job, but it's important to note that recruiters typically focus on an industry or a specific type of role. So make sure to identify the recruiter who hires for the kind of job you're looking for. And there are several things that you can do that will help you stand out to a recruiter. There isn't a hard and fast rule for how often to follow up, but if you ask for a timeline and the date for hearing back has passed, don't hesitate to check in. And for university recruiting, especially when it's busy in the fall, I would even encourage you to follow up frequently if there's a delay in hearing back. I also recommend that you attend the recruiter's networking events. This can be virtual, especially today, but this is a great way to get yourself noticed and have the ability to get in front of them about what you're looking for. Always be prepared and be specific. And I also recommend to respond in a timely manner, meaning typically if they request time for an interview, if you can respond within the same day or within a day, that will usually keep you top of mind. And then finally, let's say if things happen and you have an interview schedule mix up, always be professional and courteous. That will definitely help you stand out. So there comes a time, either at the beginning or towards the end of the interview process, where you might get asked the question, what is your salary expectation? Or what is your ideal compensation? So this comes up a lot. Sharing my salary expectations with the recruiter will only hurt my chances at a better offer. Is this fact or fiction? If you guess fiction, then you're correct. This is absolutely not true. What recruiters are trying to accomplish with this question is to check to see if we are in the same ballpark. This is very, very different from the question, what are you currently making? Which is actually an illegal question across several states in the United States. The salary history ban prohibits employers from asking applicants about their current or past salaries and is meant to end the cycle of pay discrimination. So by the time the recruiter asks you for your salary expectation, don't be caught off guard. The best approach is to show a strong understanding of the probable salary range and have a target range ready to share. If you're not comfortable sharing in the beginning, you can always ask for more information about the job requirements and then get back to them. If this conversation is happening towards the end of your interview process, the hiring team very likely already wants to hire you. So you definitely will not offend them by asking for what you want. And if the company pulls out of the process because of this, that's a huge red flag and you dodge a bullet. So a lot of advice online tells you to research salary range on sites like Glassdoor, but sites like that are often self-reported and not reflective of the entire picture. There are also various factors that can dramatically change the compensation range, such as the job location and even the company size and the industry. So the best method is to find a trusted person within the company to help you set expectations. The next best thing is to have someone in a comparable level at a different company. Just simply ask them what they make and use that as a data point to craft your response. But let's say you truly have no idea and don't know what the position is worth. My recommendation is to ask for at least 40% more than what you're making now. The worst case is that they counter with what they can pay, and then you negotiate with that number. Final note is that the base salary is just one part of your total offer package if you're going for full-time positions, and that can include stock options, bonuses, vacation time, and other benefits. If you accidentally let yourself get lowballed, you can always negotiate these other parts of your offer. All right, so now that we've successfully navigated the interview and set your salary expectations, congratulations, you finally got an offer. Another topic that is often discussed is about the offer negotiation process. A common belief is now negotiating a job offer will come across negatively and you will start off on the wrong foot. So, is this fact or fiction? You guessed it, it's fiction. So negotiation is actually an expected part of the interview process. I expect you to negotiate. It's also a signal of commitment and seriousness. Most highly attractive candidates negotiate, oftentimes because they have a lot of other options and other offers. And companies actually respect candidates who negotiate. So you might be thinking to yourself, but I only went for an internship, or this is a small company, or but the offer is already beyond what I expected. It does not matter. Always, always negotiate. If on the off chance the compensation is firm and can't be changed, which sometimes happens, maybe with especially internship roles or entry-level positions, the worst that can happen is that they will tell you no. You will not damage the relationship by negotiating. So here are some high-level tips on how to go about it. Stay positive, even if you were initially disappointed by the offer. You want to show that you're still interested in the position and you want to have a conversation. And staying positive will help you have a more successful negotiation. Explain your reasoning. Highlight your experience, education level, add any sort of justification that will help your case, because this will help your recruiter make a case for you. Compile all of your asks up front. This is super important because your recruiter is likely working with other teams, such as your hiring team, the compensation team, in order to get the approvals for any changes to your offer. So in order to expedite approvals and then keeping the negotiations from getting drawn out and going sour, you want to get all of your questions asked upfront and all of what you want upfront. And for your protection, get everything in writing. If the conversation is happening over the phone or video, make sure that you're recapping over email afterwards. That way you can keep track of all the changes and then make sure that everything is represented the right way. Finally, what do I mean by have alternatives? What I mean by that is use your current offer and leverage it for other offers. If you have other interviews in progress, tell these other companies that you have an offer in hand and actually might expedite your interviews. Once you have other offers, you will have an even stronger case to negotiate with. So along these lines, it's also really tricky to navigate offer decisions. So I see this sometimes online where people say it is okay to accept an offer, but then decline later once a better offer comes along. So is this fact or fiction? Don't do it. Backing out of an offer after accepting is a harmful practice, and there are several reasons why you shouldn't do this. First of all, it is damaging to your reputation because it's a small world. The people that you interviewed with they may or may not go to other companies and they might run into in the future. So definitely think about that. Second, it burns bridges. You may or may not want to go back to this company in the future and work there. By doing this, by backing out of an offer last minute, it's such a bad practice that it may actually prevent you from being able to do that. Third, it definitely cost a lot of time and resources to your former team that you were supposed to join, because they were banking on you starting to be able to distribute some of the work to you and have, they may have projects already waiting for you to start with. And now they're behind schedule because now they're overloaded, and they also have to start over interviewing to fill your position. So backing out of an offer is definitely not a decision to make lightly. However, if it is inevitable due to unforeseen circumstances, always communicate. Let your recruiter know immediately so that they can figure out ways to lessen the damage, and it will also maybe maintain your relationship with the team. So before we wrap up, I want to address one more thing. What if you did everything we discussed, from practicing networking, from researching the interviewers and interviewing, and then unfortunately, at the end of it, you still don't hear back after several weeks? Ideally, recruiters should inform their candidates of what is happening every step of the way and share the final decision no matter the outcome. So when you don't hear back, there can be a multitude of reasons. Maybe the hiring team is still making a decision and gathering feedback, or they're still interviewing candidates, but you are still a contender. The recruiter may have left the company, or the team is small and everything is manual. They don't have an ATS. Or maybe the recruiter is overwhelmed and unfortunately dropped the ball. Not hearing back is frustrating and definitely unnerving, but don't let this discourage you. Sometimes no news is good news. Your recruiter will still be your best bet for understanding where you stand in the recruitment process. Keep following up every few weeks and restating your interest for the role. Remember to always stay polite and professional. The same rule of thumb goes for candidates too. If you get another offer and you need to drop out of other interviews, let the recruiter know as soon as possible instead of not showing up for the interview. All right, so we are at the end, and I hope you found this session informative and learned how to stand out and get a recruiter's attention. I want to leave you today with 3 key takeaways. Throughout your entire career, it is so important to network. So I hope you understand the importance of networking, and that it's also more important to have a few deep connections instead of many shallow ones. Second, as you learned today, every step of the process, from the application all the way to offer stage, requires a lot of research. Research everyone and everything. And last, always negotiate. And if you follow the best practices, you will not only impress your recruiter and the hiring team, but also earn their respect for being a savvy professional. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Grace. There absolutely are questions. I'm seeing them in the door right now.
Okay,
So
awesome.
I'm glad you asked, because we do have
Cool.
questions. But thank you so much for that presentation.
Yeah, no
Definitely
problem.
super insightful. I learned some things that I thought were correct, but definitely wasn't sure sort of what was happening on the back end. So really helpful,
Awesome.
and definitely enlightening for our college students. And so with that said, I'm going to head over to the Dory and ask the first question, which is from Lauren here. And Lauren is wondering, what are some recommendations you have for landing your first internship, such as how to target companies that would accept underclassmen, and how to fill out the experience section on our resume, and knockout questions?
That's a great question. So when you say underclassmen, do you mean that it's a sophomore or like freshman?
Freshman, sophomore. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a really great question. So first of all, a lot of companies nowadays actually have dedicated programs for freshmen and sophomore applicants. And it definitely doesn't hurt for you to specifically ask the recruiting team. So when you see a job posting and there usually is a contact person, ask them if it's open to underclassmen. And that's one way to get your response and then be able to do the research on whether or not they accept that. The other way is just simply Googling what type of companies out there are offering programs specifically dedicated to freshmen and sophomores, because there are actually a ton out there, and they're usually meant to be kind of a exploratory internship. So meaning that it's a step, a step in between a full like internship with work projects, while also still having the title of an intern. So they can also take shape in the form of a leadership program. So you should definitely look into all of these options. In terms of the experience piece for getting noticed, I would say that before you have actual work experience or an internship to share, highlight any volunteer work or project work and list them as an experience. Because whether or not you led a project in a class, or if you led a project or led a event through a volunteer organization, all of that counts, because the interview team is actually looking for leadership skills and other transferable skills that they know you can develop in other ways. So as long as you're able to represent all of that instead of just leaving your resume blank, then that really makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And Iris is wondering, how do you negotiate salary as an intern, if you do so?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that you should always negotiate, but sometimes they might have non-negotiables. For instance, like at the internship level, they might say that it's not negotiable because it's standard across the board. However, you never know because every company is different. So the best way to go about it is always still ask and say, is this offer open to negotiation? Just as simple as that. And you can do that in email or over the phone, but basically just ask. And you actually would be surprised if they say yes, but if they say no, then that's fine, because you would have gone no anyways by not asking. So definitely always negotiate, and then make sure you just start off the question. And then after that, of course, don't go in there without preparing. So make sure you know what a target range is. So let's say if the internship offer was lacking relocation and you need to relocate, that would be something you want to negotiate. So you want to ask, like, is a relocation package available? If they say no, but you have another internship offer with a relocation package, bring it up and say, my other offer has a relocation package, but I prefer to intern with you guys. So is there any way you can match? Or just say that you have a target number in mind. I'm aiming for X target because your other offer is that way, and then see what they can do. They might surprise you.
Yeah. So ask, but do so respectfully and within the realm. That's really good advice. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And a question from Ben here, which is sort of on the networking piece, and that is, are you supposed to accept all LinkedIn requests? A few people I do not know have asked to connect with me. Is my goal to make my LinkedIn as big as possible? Would love some insight.
So that all depends on, what you're trying to do with that. So you can connect with a lot of people if what you want to build is an audience. Let's say if you have a really successful newsletter, you're trying to build a newsletter or a podcast or even like a channel on YouTube. Sure, having like millions of strangers follow you is the good approach. But when it comes to networking for a job, having a lot of random people connect with you doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, because they don't know you, so they can't vouch for your work. And when we talk about referrals, what we mean is that it's an internal employee at a company who know you personally and can really speak to your abilities and your accomplishments and what capacity they've worked with you to see all of this, all of your accomplishments in the past. And that is actually a tremendously powerful thing compared to someone that just connected with on LinkedIn. You don't know who they are, but you submitted them, as a referral. That's a very different thing. And so for it to be really successful, still going back to the deep connections, that's actually like the number one key, component of networking that really makes a true difference.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to circle back to sort of the negotiation question. And that's it. You say, always negotiate,
Yeah, sure.
which I agree with. But can you give an example of a negotiation conversation that you've had, one that went well, maybe one that went poorly? The student's asking, I struggle to appropriately advocate for myself when I'm desperate for a job and internship, and I think I just take what I can. So, if you could sort of speak more to that again.
Do you mind rephrasing that question or repeating one more time because it was cutting out a little bit for me?
No, of course. The question is, can you give an example of negotiation conversation that you have had, one that went well and one that went poorly? I struggle to advocate appropriately for myself when I'm desperate for a job and internship and think I would just take what I can get.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely something that takes a lot of practice. So first of all, like I don't expect anyone to go into a negotiation their first try and then be, really relaxed because it's definitely like a nerve-wracking thing to do. But what I'm trying to say is that the hiring team at that point, they gave you an offer, they want you on board. They've already invested all this time and resource to get to know you, and they've already decided that you're the one. So right now, at this point of the negotiation, it's really down to how can they make sure that you're happy to make the move to join their team, right? And of course, like you want to continuously be courteous because this is considered as still part of the entire process before you start as a full-time employee. So one of the most, I would say like the most successful approach is of course, someone who is very proactive. So the minute you get an offer and you take a day or two to read it over, don't wait until like the night before your deadline to ask to negotiate. First of all, like just be proactive. So immediately tell them you want to negotiate. Here are the different components of your offer that you want to negotiate and talk about. And here are the reasons why. So the most successful negotiations I've seen, people have compelling reasons. Either they have additional like project work, accolades, anything that they want to bring up, or they want to reiterate something that they already brought up during the interview process. And then they can also, again, like leverage other offers to talk about why they want to negotiate for a different offer. And then, of course, like being proactive and following up after you hear back from the recruiter. So let's say you have a conversation with them, and then this is about the initial negotiation. And then they say, oh, we'll get back to you. And you don't hear back for, let's say, like a couple of days. Keep following up to see like where things are at because you don't want to come across as like insecure about this. And you want to also be firm about what you're asking because you know that they want you. So just understand the logic and the psychology there. And of course, like if you are, really nervous to have this conversation over the phone or video, you can always type out a script for yourself and just like read off of it. And there are so many tips and tricks to negotiation that you can compile like what works for you and then make sure that you are sticking to, of course, like your target and not deviating from that. So for instance, like if you're asking for, oh, I want $50 an hour, let's say, and then don't immediately say, but I'm flexible if you want to change that and talk about something else. Like don't immediately offer to back out of what you just said you want. Just stop right there and then let them get back to you. And chances are if they're taking a little bit longer, it's because they need to talk to a lot of people to get approvals. Otherwise, it's definitely keep in mind that once you have the offer, that's a really, really positive thing and you have a lot of control.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sort of following up on that question and giving some examples and best practices. Absolutely, I think it's a hard thing to do when you haven't done it before, so it's kind of daunting. So it's definitely helpful to hear your
Yeah,
perspective
definitely.
on that. Thank you. And then a question from Rosie here, which is is it better to reach out to a recruiter before or after you submit an application to the company that they work for? In this case, what do you say to get them to look at your resume?
Awesome. That's a great question. I would say definitely apply first because it shows proactiveness and it shows initiative. I love it when I've talked to someone for the first time and they say they have already applied, because usually my next question would be, have you already applied? Because if you haven't applied, then I need to wait, X amount of time until you actually do so. And by then, time already changed. Lots of things have happened. I might not even be with the company anymore. Like, who knows, right? So then you need to be proactive, be quick about everything, and then definitely apply first, and then reach out to the recruiter to talk about things that's specific. And to get a response from the recruiter, again, ask a specific question. I get a lot of cold emails all the time where they're just like, can you tell me more about the company? Do I have time to do that? I hope so, but typically it would be so much better if you have a specific ask. And if you say like, oh, does your company offer XYZ? Or does this job, work on XYZ? Something specific that I can actually quickly answer or even want to have a conversation really quickly with you about. Just keep in mind that you're working with somebody, and if it's an initial outreach, you want to actually get them to have a conversation with you, and to do so, having a very specific question helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a question that you sort of already just answered, but I want to see if there's anything else that you'd like to add to it. And
Yeah,
because
sure.
Levy was asking, but for best practices, when you're cold messaging recruiters on LinkedIn, how to stand out from all of the messages that you receive. So I'm guessing, yeah, don't ask for like general information that can be found on their website and waste time. But on top of that, do you have any sort of tips?
Yeah, well, like my number one tip is actually that LinkedIn is really great for doing some research and sleuthing, but not so great for responses. So if you want to use LinkedIn to review their profile and see what their previous experience is like, or to kind of see if there's any connections between, who they know and who you know, that's a huge benefit for LinkedIn. Getting responses, not so much, because almost everyone's inbox, if they're in a hiring manager position or a recruiter position, typically are overwhelmed. So I would actually recommend, if you're able to find an email scraper to figure out their corporate email and email them directly, your response rate will go up significantly. But back to your question about how to actually stand out on LinkedIn, I would say if you attach your resume, that's actually a huge one, because if your initial email has just very basic general information or almost no information, and just like, oh, I want to connect with you, it doesn't really give them a particular reason to review your profile and get back to you. But if you have your resume on there and it happens to be a role that they're looking for, that would actually get your response rate up. The other thing too is always ask what they recruit for. Every recruiter, no matter what company they're at, whether or not they're internal or external, they specialize in something. So if you reach out to me and you're looking for a marketing role, chances are I probably would not be able to help, because I'm a technical recruiter and I hire for software engineers, So that's one of the biggest things that will actually help you get on the right track, is ask like, do you recruit for this role? If not, can you connect me with somebody who does? And I might be like, yeah, I do. And I can connect you with somebody really quickly. So that actually will improve your response rate by a lot, because you're now reaching the right audience.
Yeah, that's super, super helpful. And I want to ask question on sort of the actual applicant process, which is, can you provide advice for someone who's applying to a position even when they don't meet all of the requirements or most of the requirements? We've had speakers come in the past and say, yeah, I applied to this position. I wasn't really that qualified, right? And like I got the job and it was a great experience, but I think it's pretty daunting, especially if you have less experience and you're maybe just a year out of college or still in college, to be confident and say that. So what kind of advice do you have for that?
So let me understand the question again. So the question is, do I recommend applying to jobs even if they don't meet the qualifications?
Yeah, I guess yes, one, do you recommend? And two, either way, do you have sort of advice if you do apply to a position that you might not be fully qualified for?
Okay, got it. So first of all, at the entry level, I would say that it depends on what type of result you want, right? So I definitely hear a lot from candidates who tell me that they've applied to like hundreds or thousands of positions. And sure, maybe one of those applications will go somewhere, but is that a good use of your time? I would say no, because a lot of the time you were spending applying to all these different companies in all these different places may have been better suited if you had just like focused on a couple of actually very viable options. And so I would actually recommend, again, like going back to the drawing board, really looking through and understanding what some of these companies are looking for. And even if you don't have any experience, for instance, there are certain companies that focus on maybe the same, a lot of people from the same, degree, major, what you're studying, or maybe even just your interests. So for instance, like if you're very passionate about environmental science, there are companies out there where that's their entire mission statement. And if you were to apply to some place like that and you highlight that and you repeat that and you make that really known, your chances of getting a response is much higher than if you were just throwing out applications everywhere. The second piece is like, how do you represent yourself when you don't have much experience? And I would say that, not all companies are equal in terms of like their candidate pool. So like you do have to realize that, usually like much more well-known companies, like bigger companies, they're going to get a lot more applications usually. And that's just a general rule of thumb, not, fact. But if you were to apply to a smaller company where they may not get, tons of applications, then your chances of getting noticed is higher. So in those cases, then yes, you may actually apply to something where you're not exactly meeting all the qualifications, but they might still consider you if they see a potential or there's other transferable skills that you can bring to the role. So it really depends on those different situations, but I still think that when it comes to the application process, like if you are doing your research and being smart and strategic about it, your results will be a lot better.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful advice. So thank you for sort of making that distinction. And then
Yeah.
yeah, and a question from Alina, which is, um, how can you check if your offer is at par with your male/white counterparts?
That's a great question. So again, like back to what I was saying earlier about, the entire salary expectations piece. One really good rule of thumb is really to see if you know somebody at the company who's willing to share with you their compensation, because that's like the truest current data points compared to everything that's floating online that could be outdated, could be self-reported from a different department, different industry, different location. And then so that's not going to be an accurate representation. And it's also not an accurate representation of like the people getting paid at the high end of each role, right? So I would say that there are some, sources out there that are more accurate than others, but it never gets more accurate than just asking somebody that you trust who can tell you the exact number. And then so the other thing too is like looking into comparable companies and in comparable, comparable, what I mean by that is like same industry, same size company, and definitely same location. And then you'll be able to get closer to the truth. And I guess finally, like, if there's any professional organizations that you join online, could be like, even Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups. There's a lot of like industry groups on Meetup also. There are people there who are willing to share like what you should be targeting. And then that's actually another really good way of being more on par. And then finally, negotiate. A lot of the reasons why women and minorities are, discriminated when it comes to pay is sometimes, oftentimes actually because they don't negotiate. And when you don't ask, you don't get any changes. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah, thank you. It's an important question, so I think I definitely appreciate your answer and
Yeah,
the
sure.
advice that you gave out. And this question is again back to like the networking and LinkedIn. And do you have examples of specific asks that work when people are reaching out to companies like dream companies that they're interested in, people that work there? Like what are asks that that might sort of prompt a response?
Yeah. So I would say if you are really good about internet detection work, be a detective and look into who they know that you also know, right? So let's say you're reaching out to me and you request to connect with me and I accept, or even if I don't, you can look through like who I'm connected to. And you're like, oh, I know Albert. Albert's my friend from school. And you can say like, oh, I know Albert, and even if Albert never mentioned a word to me, just say that you know Albert and you are interested in learning more about, XYZ position at your company. That always immediately gets someone's attention if you name somebody that is a mutual connection. And even better, if you talk to Albert and have Albert send you to me or just give me a heads up that you're reaching out and you'll definitely get a response that way. The other method is, again, like going back to being specific, check to see if this is actually the person you need to talk to, right? So ask if I am actually hiring for the right department, the right type of role, the right location, because maybe I'm based in Singapore and I only hire for Singapore, like you never know. So make sure that that's something that you clarify and set the expectation, and then you'll be able to get better results and responses. Let me think. Another one that really stood out is if you are to not just attach your resume, but bullet point your biggest accomplishments. If you send me like a really solid intro email that has like everything highlighted of basically like why I need to pay attention, I will pay attention. Like we are looking for great talent all the time. And if someone just like drops in our lap, we're going to pay attention. So make yourself that person.
Yeah, no, I love that advice, and I think it's sometimes hard to distill like your greatest accomplishments or what you think objectively are your greatest accomplishments. So it's
Yes,
definitely worth taking the time to do that if it's going to help.
exactly.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
guess don't be lazy. Do make those bullet points. That's great advice.
Yep.
Something that I think everyone can work on, me included. And a question here from Tamara about LinkedIn again, which is what do recruiters look for if they look through the recommendations on LinkedIn? Are there specific things um, that we should ask to be addressed by our recommenders on the page that are universally appealing to recruiters to stand out?
So recommendations on LinkedIn, what should be addressed? That's a really great question because you're actually in full control of that. So one recommendation I have is when you reach out to someone to provide you a LinkedIn recommendation, you can actually provide them some guidelines on what you would like them to focus on. So for instance, if this is a former supervisor, you can actually follow up and say, hey, thank you so much for agreeing to write me a recommendation on LinkedIn. Remember that we worked on this project and I co-led, this thing from start to end, start to finish, and resulted in all these great things. I would love for you to incorporate that into my recommendation. And these are all ways that you can actually have a lot of varied recommendations that highlight different aspects of your work and your ability. The other thing too is think through and have a varied approach to the people you ask for recommendations. If you already have a bunch of colleagues or coworkers or classmates write you recommendations, try to diversify that to maybe people that you mentored or even people who supervised you. So that way you have like a good range of different types of people that interacted with you, and then you can see at a glance, all the different influences and what they think of your work. I hope I
Yeah,
answered that question.
I think you did. I think
Okay.
definitely covered that. This is from Iris, and feel free to say this is not in your realm to answer now at this
Okay,
point.
sure.
But the question is, does Visa hire any product manager, intern slash full-time positions? And what advice would you have for applying?
Uh, I believe so. Yeah, so that is not in my realm, but
That's totally fine.
but
Um,
typically my advice for applying is that having your resume completely proofread, edited, ready to go before the recruiting season even starts is paramount. You don't want to be spending like the last moment of, the night before application deadlines in something that is full of spelling errors or missing any key qualifications that you have that you forgot to mention. You actually would be surprised like how many resumes we get where people then mention things during the interview process. And I was like, why didn't you put down your resume? Put everything on your resume that you definitely would want to highlight. Because again, like let's say if you know Python and you didn't put that anywhere on your resume, how would we know? Right. So that's a big, that's actually completely in your control. And then the other thing too is for most companies, especially at the intern level, their positions will be posted online on their career site, but not just their career site. Usually they have a dedicated separate career site for university positions. So make sure that if you don't see it on their main career site, you might be on the wrong page actually. And sometimes they don't make it super clear. So my top tip is actually to just search it, just type in the search box, company name, internship, company name, intern. And then they'll pop up, within the top like 5 results, the actual career page for their university positions. So do it that way, and then you won't miss an opportunity because you missed the deadline or couldn't find the website or something like that.
yeah, no, thank you. That's helpful. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions here. And so this question sort of circles back to the negotiation process. And Tamar is asking, can you offer best resources in terms of learning how to negotiate properly? How did you learn how to negotiate for your positions? Other ways, I guess, maybe you can practice these.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. Um, there are a lot of negotiation books out there, and of course, like some are better than others. Is there a way I can share maybe like resources after, James?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I can dig through my archives and then look through what worked for me and then be able to share that with you. But that's a really good question. And of course, like when it comes to negotiation, there's also a lot of, there's just a lot of noise online about how to go about it. But the main thing is that there's a very specific nuance when it comes to salary negotiations compared to like other sort of business negotiations. So if you're searching for how to negotiate an offer, don't, just look at any type of negotiation tip out there because that's very different from like negotiating to buy a car, for instance. There's like different methods. And of course, like the core of negotiation might be the same, but the specific nuance of like how do you go about an offer negotiation might be very different. So just like keep that in mind. And then some other resources would be honestly like joining an industry group. So a lot of industry groups, they offer seminars, they offer free info sessions for people within their industry, because negotiating within a different industry is actually also very different just because their offer components can vary so dramatically. So what works for like negotiating process for going into a law firm, for instance, might be very different from negotiating to work as a software engineer. And then that also is very different from negotiating to work for, let's say, like a marketing role, because these are all like very different specific types of careers. And then they have different, the offers will be very different because of the, just like the competitiveness of that candidate pool. So just keep that all in mind.
Awesome. Yeah, no, agreed. And that sort of brings us to time. Grace, I can't thank you enough. This has been like
Yeah, no
incredibly
problem.
helpful
Awesome.
because I feel like recruiters are sort of such an important aspect of like the early hiring process, especially. And it's really daunting, and it's hard to know what happens behind the curtain and what happens from a recruiter sort of standpoint. So getting these tips, these best practices from the source itself is so incredibly helpful. So
No problem.
thank you so much for this presentation, preparing it, and then this hour that you spent with us today.
I'm so glad, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Everyone, thank you for joining in on the YouTube live as well. This is our final event for the week. So thank you for joining for all these different Xoogler School events. Week 3 was really awesome. And Grace, thank you so much for closing it out. Definitely make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube and all our social media so you get notified when we have these events. I'll post the schedule of, I'll screen share the schedule for next week, but you can go to xooglerschool.com to see the upcoming events that will be streamed on YouTube. But with that said, Grace, again, thanks so much. And to everyone, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.